here to our first of the 4 lecture series here for the Nativity season. Oh, I forgot to say, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lydia Manson, and I am on the Adult Ed Committee here at Christ Savior. Father Deacon John is away for his anniversary, so he asked me to pitch in for him today. As some of you may know, over Nativity, we have 4 lectures leading up to Christmas, the Nativity, and tonight we're going, or this time it's Saints of North America. So this is going to be the first of those 4. And as always, we try to keep it to an hour, but just in case, we might run over a little bit, as Father mentioned, and we are all very respectful of the time, and we'll try to keep it to that. After that, please feel free. We're going to have questions if anybody has any questions, and also feel free to have some fellowship and some snacks. So, as I mentioned, it's the Saints of North America tonight, and we are going to listen to Ray Reese present the Saints of New York. Ray.
Ray.
We're just about to ask you to hear me. So thank you all for coming. Please pray for me. I haven't been in a classroom situation where I've been out in front of people for probably like 10 or 12 years. So, I'm out of practice, so try not to heckle too bad. A little bit's okay. Leader Matthew came up to me before the conference service and said, don't do this in a Brooklyn accent, so I'm just going to speak Brooklyn. That's not going to happen. So, not going to happen. Anyway, so let's get started. So we have a lot to cover tonight. So as I said, or as Lydia introduced, tonight we're going to be starting with the Saints of New York. A couple of them anyway. There are more than 2, and so I've limited it to 2 because these saints have such full lives. There's no way you can do them justice if you try to cram 4 into 45-minute or an hour-long session. You just really skip the tops of their lives, and you don't really have the opportunity to really delve into the story at all. So tonight we're going to discuss, first of all, before we actually get to the saints, since this is the first session that we're doing, I just wanted to introduce the whole series a little bit and go over a couple things that many of you probably know, but some of you may not. So, first of all, what is a saint? A saint, the word saint actually means holy one, and it comes from the Latin word sanctus. You probably have heard, maybe you have, the phrase sanctum sanctorum, which is the Latin phrase for Holy of Holies, which was the central part of the tabernacle or the temple where the Ark of the Covenant was positioned, and the high priest could only go in once a year. You might also know that phrase if you read Dr. Strange comics as a kid, because he also calls his headquarters the Sanctum Sanctorum. So the one's certainly more important than the other. A saint is one who the church recognizes as having lived an especially holy life, or one who the church points to as an example for us to follow. Saints come in all shapes and sizes. Some saints were great theologians and intellectual giants. Others were uneducated and lived in obscurity. Some performed miracles. Others were martyred. Still others dedicated their lives in the service of the poor, and that is both spiritual poverty and physical poverty. As Orthodox Christians, we do not venerate, even though we venerate rather than worship the saints. We're often accused of worshiping saints or worshiping Mary. We do not do that. We ask for their intercessions and look to their examples to point us to Christ. I won't discuss the worship versus venerate tonight because that's a bit out of the purview of the discussion. But if you have questions about that, I'm sure Father Stephen or any of our clergy would be happy to answer that. But we will move on. And why study the lives of the saints? It's certainly not an exhaustive list by any means, but some things that I thought of were to emulate. St. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. And they show us what we can become through grace and the voluntary taking up of our cross. Additionally, they exhort us. Exhort is just another word for encourage. They can encourage us through their lives, their teaching, and their Christian endings. You think, well, not all of these saints had very nice endings. Some of them were tortured, martyred, endured unbelievable horrors. But the way they can encourage us even in that is through their testimony, through their steadfastness in their faith. And so when we encounter difficulties in life, which we probably don't measure up to a lot of difficulties they went through, we can try to emulate their faith and persevere. Also to convict, through their examples and teaching, they show us where we fall short. And certainly as I was doing the investigation and reading and compiling the information on the two saints that I'm talking about tonight, their lives were very convicting because of the level of holiness and the level of love and care that they exhibited throughout their lives. And lastly, many of the saints were also theologians who clarified doctrine and defended the faith against heresy. So tonight, I'll be looking at St. Raphael of Brooklyn and St. John Maximinus of Shanghai and San Francisco. So we're going to begin with St. Raphael of Brooklyn. This is his icon, obviously. I'm going to try to go quickly over his early biography. He was born as Raphael Hawawini in Beirut in November of 1860. He was born in Beirut. His family was actually from Damascus, but in that year they fled to Beirut because of anti-Christian riots and persecution in Damascus. So they went to Beirut. He was born, and fortunately a year later things calmed down. They were able to go back to Damascus. And at that point, he entered school. So in his late teens, he also works as a school teacher and briefly serves as the assistant to the Patriarch of Antioch prior to entering the Ecumenical Patriarch's Theological School at Halki. And Halki is an island just off the coast of what is now Turkey. So if there's Halki, you can barely see it. It's super small. Here is Syria. Damascus is his hometown. Beirut is where he was born. And then he goes here and spends 7 years on the island of Halki. And it's a very small island. It's only about 5 miles across. It's just off the coast of southeast, what is now southeast, or southwest Turkey, rather. And it's a very barren landscape. This is the, thanks Google Earth. This is a satellite photo of Halki. You can see how barren and rocky and mountainous it is. There's not a lot of foliage. There's a little bit right here. That's about it. Everything else is rocky. But it is a beautiful place, and probably not as beautiful as it is now because it's become a resort. And so this is a fairly current picture of one of the towns in Halki. But you can still tell sort of what a barren and desolate place it is if you're not at a resort. So he studies at Halki for 7 years and is ordained a deacon when he finishes. And when he finishes his studies on Halki, he returns to Syria and travels with Patriarch Gerasimos of Antioch. And as his assistant, he is tasked with preaching throughout this area. And the reason he's asked to preach, he's one of the few educated clergymen in the Patriarchate. Ordinary priests, most of them who are not very well educated, were not allowed to preach. And so he basically worked as an itinerant preacher, traveling around and performing homilies. That's really the right word. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but doing homilies throughout that jurisdiction. So after that, he enters the Kiev Theological Academy of the Russian Empire. Though he isn't allowed to complete his studies because the Patriarch of Antioch asks the Russian church to ordain Raphael, who was in the Antiochian church, to the priesthood in order to take over the duties at the Metochion, replacing a priest who was deposed for heresy. Now, Metochion, which I wasn't familiar with this term until I was reading about it, is essentially an embassy church. It is a church that's planted from another jurisdiction inside a jurisdiction, a foreign jurisdiction. It works very much like embassies for nation states. We have, the United States has embassies in Lebanon and Russia and places all over the world, and essentially those are American soil in those lands. And so this acts very much the same way. This was an Antiochian church that was positioned in the middle of the Russian Empire. So while he's there, the now archimandrite, Raphael begins stirring the pot, and over his lifetime he's involved in quite a bit of pot stirring. And some of the pots he stirs himself, such as in this case, and other pots he jumps in that are already stirring. And this seems to be a theme of his life. So what happens is that while he's a priest here, he writes under a pseudonym. He publishes these articles that criticize the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre, which is a monastic group who guards the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and some of the surrounding holy sites. And he also accuses the Greek-controlled patriarchates of Antioch and Jerusalem of mistreating the indigenous faithful who were under their care. He also advocates for the Church of Antioch to be governed by native clergy instead of foreign hierarchs, which I guess had been happening for some time and resulted in some corruption and mistreatment of the people. So in November of 1891, Metropolitan Spiridon, the Greek Cypriot, is elected as Patriarch of Antioch. Well, this goes right away against what Raphael would like to see, another Greek over the Antiochians. So, and he is elected under some suspicion of buying the election by paying off important people to vote for him. So that's, not going to help matters at all. But not only is Raphael eventually discovered to be the author of these articles, he refuses to commemorate Spiridon during the services. And this leads Patriarch Spiridon to suspend him from his priestly functions. And during that time, he's granted canonical release to the Russian Orthodox Church. So at this time, he goes from the Antiochian Church into the Russian Church. That doesn't stop him from writing, but Raphael's suspension is eventually lifted after he agrees to ask Patriarch Spiridon's forgiveness, which is facilitated by a mutual friend. Spiridon found a friend of Raphael's and said, hey, let's kind of smooth this over. Can you talk to Raphael and have him come to me and ask me for forgiveness? I really appreciate it. So that's what he does. Raphael agrees, and so things are smoothed over, and he's reinstated. So for the rest of his life, he seems to have 1 foot in each of the jurisdictions. He's 1 foot in the Antiochian church and 1 foot in the Russian church. So then he goes to Kazan, which is part of Russia that is about 450 miles east of Moscow. And he takes a position as an instructor in Arabic studies at the Theological Academy. This Theological Academy is also called the Anti-Muslim Missionary School, so not the most politically correct name, but it's very descriptive. So in addition to being the instructor of Arabic studies, he also teaches polemics against the Muslim faith. Go figure, right? So we haven't found any of his notes, but it would probably be interesting to read what he had to say about that. So while he's teaching there in Kazan, St. Raphael receives a letter from a Syrian doctor in New York City, who is the president of the Syrian Orthodox Benevolent Society, requesting his help. The letter essentially says, hey, we know about you, we know you're in Russia, we need help, can you please come help us? And so many people call this his Macedonian moment. And if you might remember, I lost my place here. You might remember the book of Acts. It recounts how Paul is on a missionary journey to Asia Minor, and he tends to go east, but something stops him in his tracks and makes him change course. And that is a vision that he has while sleeping, which is illustrated right over here. I got this offline. My guess is either Jehovah's Witness or Mormon, maybe, because it just looks like that. This nice very block 70s hair. So, this is not actually a photograph from his actual vision. This is probably heretical paintings, but it illustrates the point. So we're going to leave that for now. A vision appears to Paul in the night. In Acts 16 goes on. A vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there. That's him right there. With the 70s hair. Standing there urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia, help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we, and the we there is St. Paul, St. Luke, who's with him on this journey, who was also writing the book of Acts, and the rest of the people accompanying him on this missionary trip. We sought to go immediately to Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So just as that vision is what took Paul westward to spread Christianity eventually into Europe, likewise this letter causes St. Raphael to also head west from the east to become pastor of a small fledgling Arab Orthodox community in New York City who needs a priest. So he comes to New York City, and he serves as pastor for the New York community, but he does more than just become a parish priest. Forgive me, Father, that being a parish priest is never a just. We all know that it's a full-time job.
We're good, Ray. Don't worry about it.
But in addition to that, he also ministers to all the Antiochians, which there are probably not that many, but they're scattered all over North America, and they're under the oversight of the Russian mission. And he also begins recruiting priests from Syria to fill all these vacancies. And the way he does this is through these missionary journeys that he undertakes in the late 1800s. So in 1896, he undertakes the first of his transcontinental missionary journeys. He goes from New York all the way to San Francisco. He makes 30 stops along the way, and he travels by train, by donkey, by horse and carriage, by foot, by water, any way he can get to these places he goes. The following year, he goes on another, well actually 2 years later, he goes on another, and then the following year, in 1899, he sets out again, covering the north and northeastern United States, along with the Great Plains, and then in 92, in addition to covering more of the U.S., he also visits Cuba and Mexico. So how does he know where to stop? He's never met any of these people, he's never been to any of these places, so how does he know where to go in the United States and Canada and Mexico and Cuba? Well, anyway, as I was researching St. Raphael, I came across a video by Father Josiah Trenum, who discusses exactly how he did this. And I've got a little excerpt that I'm going to let you hear, and Father Trenum talks about how he figured out where to go, and also he provides a nice anecdotal story about St. Raphael's pastoral heart in the Herculean efforts he goes through to minister to all of these people across the United States.
Story about him coming to an area. He would usually collect over the course of the year notes. People would send notes to him in the post about their cousin who's in this town in Nebraska and their uncle and his family that's in this town in Texas, etc. He would gather these notes and then kind of use them as stops so that he would arrange his visits so that he could pastorally care for all of these people who are in these different places. And the story goes, he's in the middle of one of these multi-month long non-stop trips. And he came to the only place on the journey where he didn't have any papers. He didn't have anything where that would tell him where people were. So he went to his hotel, got in late, went to his hotel, put his bags down, and then instead of doing what I would do, which is get on a nice boat and take a little rest because you're exhausted, he went down to the front desk and said, "Look, are there any Orthodox Christians?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, what about people with this last name and that last name and this last name?" And he started going through it, and eventually he said something, and the man said, "Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, there's someone that if you just go down here a couple miles this way and that way, there's a farm. I think those people have a last name like that." So he went down there, and he got there, and he found out that those people were Maronites, and he had a nice interaction with them. And he said, "Look, are there any Orthodox?" They said, "Well, actually, I think so. Over here and there." Anyway, he went to that next village and that next farm. By 3 a.m., he had gathered a flock of people who hadn't seen an Orthodox priest or bishop for a very, very long time. He heard their confessions, he served the liturgy and blessed water to sprinkle on the house, did the baptisms of all the children, married the couples that either were not married or had been married by heterodox ministers, chrismated all the kids who had been baptized by Catholic priests in order to make the kids Orthodox, served the liturgy, communed all the faithful, preached to them the soul benefiting word of God, and then went back to his hotel and got his bags just in time to get back on to the train. This is the heart of the Good Shepherd of the lost sheep of America, St. Raphael himself.
Yeah, I think all of us have, been on long travel journeys. Am I on again?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I think all of us have been on long travel journeys and certainly can sympathize with Father Tram that sometimes you just want to stay in your hotel room and relax. And so this really shows his pastoral heart, I think, very well. Amazing man. So during his time in America, the whole time he's in America, which is a total of about 20 years, he's offered various positions back in the old world, all of which he refuses. He really has come to feel that this is his missionary field. This is where God has placed him. He loves these people, and he refuses all of those. So in 1903, the Holy Synod of Russia elects Raphael as the Vicar Bishop of Brooklyn under the oversight of St. Tikhon, the Russian Archbishop of North America. He accepts the position and is ordained in 1904, and he becomes the first Orthodox bishop consecrated on American soil. So he has a very interesting consecration because it's quite a media event, which we typically don't think of for Orthodox consecrations. We don't expect the media to be there and lots of cameras and the things, but this does. It attracts a crowd of around 2,000 people who all pack into the Brooklyn Cathedral, and then you have the incense, and then you have all of the candles, and you have the no air conditioning, and so you have this massive humanity all stuffed in there like sardines. And then on top of that, you have the press. You have these journalists who are writing the stories that they're going to be publishing in the newspapers, and you have the cameraman there to take photographs. And if you recall back in the early 1900s, you just didn't flip out your phone and take some pictures. If you needed to take indoor photography, you had these flash bars that were on these big poles that stood up above the crowd. And then in these bars were powdered magnesium and two other chemicals, which I don't remember. Danny, you probably know what two other chemicals they are. And, beg pardon?
Phosphorus and something else.
Yeah, there we go. So these were ignited, and they, pow! And there would be this huge flash of light. There'd be smoke rolling off of the bar. So this is going on during the consecration, and there was one account that it got so smoky in there because of the flash cubes, the flash bars, that the liturgy itself, the people up front were obscured, and you couldn't see what was going on. The Boston Globe writes, the Boston Globe was all the way up there for this. There were half-smothered cries of women and children. At least 3 women fainted and had to be removed. And then added to that was this bevy of newspaper journalists and photographers. But we also have to remember, though, this was quite a spectacular event and very historically attractive, or something that we as Orthodox would love to have been to, because in this consecration there were 4 people celebrating who ended up being canonized as saints: Saint Raphael, Saint Tikhon, Saint Alexis Tov, and Saint Alexander Heltovisky, which is another New York saint that unfortunately I'm not able to get to tonight. But they were all there. The consecration liturgy is followed by a large dinner. The menu is published in all the newspapers, and it includes vegetables, oysters, lobsters, Damascus artichokes, fried fish, lettuce salad, peas a sarine, cabbages a la Turk, along with desserts, fruits, and Turkish coffee. So If any of you are doing Sunday fellowship and you don't have any ideas, I'm happy to provide this list to you. I think it would make a good meal for us here. So that's just a suggestion. No pressure on that. So the press portrays this whole affair as being distinctly Russian, and this displeases the local Greek Orthodox, who view it as Russian imperial expansion. The Greek consul refuses to attend, and then a few weeks later, St. Tikhon tries to go visit the Holy Trinity Greek parish in New York City, and he's refused entry. They say, like, basically, we don't want you here, get out. So Christians being wonderful to each other, right? Always. So unfortunately, that's sometimes the case. So remember when I said earlier that St. Raphael always had 1 foot in the Antiochian church and 1 foot in the Russian church. Well, he maintains this relationship with both the Russian and Antiochian churches, but many question where he really belongs. Is he Russian or is he Antiochian? And he's actually ordained in the Russian church. He was transferred to that jurisdiction back in the old world, and he's technically in the Russian church, but however he keeps very close ties with the Antiochian patriarch, which is now led by Antiochian, which he's very happy about. And so they keep in very close touch, and so much so that he's consulted before any important decisions in the Patriarchate in Antioch and informed of the outcomes all the way over here in America. So he had quite an influence in both churches. St. Raphael's church was recognized as a co-ethnic parish and was regarded as belonging to both the Russian and the Antiochian churches by both St. Tikhon and the Patriarch of Antioch. So this works out really well during his life, but after his death, this causes a little bit of confusion because questions arise about whether his flock belongs to the Russian jurisdiction or to the Antiochian, and this leads to factions and some more, face palming about Christian behavior. This creates a rift in the church which lasts for almost 6 decades. So very unfortunate there. All right, so this is another pot that St. Raphael gets into that's actually, he's trying to stop, to hold back the stirring of the pot, but it's stirring pretty well. So St. Raphael's conflict is not only with the Greeks, but it's also with some in the Syrian community, because not all the Syrians are Orthodox. Some of them are Maronite Catholic. And in Brooklyn, there are 2 newspapers published. One's an Orthodox paper called Narat Ul-Garb, translates to the Mirror of the West. I'm sure I'm desecrating that pronunciation. And then also Al-Hoda for the Maronites, whose members also refer to themselves as the Champagne Glass Club. Beautiful early 20th century pretentious name, I love it. So a war of words erupts between the 2 papers, each publishing slanderous articles against the other. I don't know what started it, probably they don't either, but it was just this constant battle back and forth between the newspapers. St. Raphael has enough, so he tells both papers, he's like, stop publishing this trash. And the Champagne Glass Club basically tells them, shut up, mind your own business, stay in your own lane. In essence, you're a priest, you do the church thing, we'll worry about this, stay out of it. So this escalates the situation. So Al-Hoda, the Maronite paper, escalates the situation by personally attacking Raphael, accusing him of all kinds of moral offenses and inciting violence. Then the Orthodox paper responds in kind. And so St. Raphael, in an attempt to tamp down the vitriol, essentially ends up throwing gas in the fire and making himself a target. So for all his efforts, it doesn't do a lot of good. So this conflict between Raphael and the Maronites spreads from the Orthodox and Catholic newspapers, and finally starts playing out in several of the New York big city papers, including the Brooklyn Daily Eagle and the New York Times. So, there's quite a lot of drama here. And although Raphael doesn't call for vengeance, he doesn't really remain silent either. At one point, he sues a Maronite editor for libel, and he seeks $23,000, which in today is about $750,000. And the case is finally dropped after the editor agrees to apologize. So the conflict soon spreads. First it was in the Orthodox Catholic newspapers, then it goes into the citywide newspapers, and now it spills into the streets. So let's go ahead and ramp this up. So tensions rise in the Syrian community. Still really don't know what they're arguing about, what they're fighting about. But there's several incidents, including street fights, and finally an Orthodox man is jumped and beaten by two Maronites late at night on the ferry back over from Manhattan. And despite the late hour, the victim's business associate asks Raphael to visit him. And I'm not going into a lot of detail here, but essentially what happens, so this is general area of the Syrian community and St. Raphael's church and his parsonage. And this is his neighborhood, thank you Google Maps. So 320 Pacific Street is where St. Raphael lives, and the victim of the beating lives over here in, what is that, 114 Pacific Street. So that's only a 12-minute walk, about half a mile, no problem, right? So they set out. St. Raphael, along with a number of his parishioners. He's now taking parishioners with him for protection because there's been assassination attempts. Well, some of his entourage are packing, and you know, you gotta protect the priest. So they never end up making it. And the reason they don't make it is because right here is 137 Pacific Street. And this is the residence of Naum Makarzel, who is a passionate Lebanese nationalist. Lebanon, the area of Lebanon was still under the control of the Ottoman Empire at that time, and there was a push for statehood for Lebanon. And for whatever reason, I don't know all the history of this, but the Maronites are much more zealous for independent Lebanese state than the Orthodox. This Makarzel guy also was one of the people that Raphael sparred with earlier in some of the newspaper articles. He's a member of the Champagne Glass Club. So coincidentally or not, Makarzel also had invited around a dozen of his friends to his house, and they're also packing. And what happens next is a matter of some dispute. Again, this is played out in citywide in the New York papers, and the accounts are all different, but essentially a gunfight breaks out in the street around midnight, and we don't know exactly what happened, who started it, whether it happened right away as they passed, whether they went in. St. Raphael said he wanted to reason with Makarzel and create peace. We know how that worked out beforehand. So it's just a bad situation. The gunfight ends when the police arrive, and a police officer actually chases down a Syrian who's fleeing. Turns out to be St. Raphael. Well, the officer claims Raphael pulled a gun on him, shot at him 3 times, missed all 3 times. And of course, or maybe it was 2, later in another paper said he shot at him twice. St. Raphael, for his part, denies pulling the gun. He claims he's never handled a revolver in his life. This just would be unpriestly to do so, which I kind of believe him on that, unless he's a rogue, which means he probably wouldn't have been a saint. After he is chased, he dives under a truck to hide, and he does admit to hiding under the truck. 2 people are injured. Fortunately, no one dies. Several were taken to jail, including Raphael, who was then kept there for several days, as the judge said, for his own protection. So if you want to know more about this story, it's told in this book called The Lost Histories, The Good and Bad, and the Strange in American Orthodoxy. And just so happens this is the book that Joe McClure's book club is reading right now, and I don't see Joe McClure
We just
here.
finished, yeah, we're gonna do it in January.
In January, okay, that's what I was going to ask. So if you want to read this book and some more crazy accounts of American saints, pick this book up. You can read a little more in-depth analysis about this particular incident, and then come to the discussion in January. So we'll just leave this chaotic scene with St. Tikhon's assessment from his annual report to the Holy Synod. It's comforting to note that although they implicate Bishop Raphael's name in all this, he himself is clean in the matter, so case closed. St. Raphael's legacy. His ministry in America lasted for another 10 years after this famous street battle. And prior to that incident, in the same year, this happened in September, and in July of 1905, Bishop Raphael consecrates the grounds for St. Tikhon's Monastery, just north of here, the first Orthodox monastery in North America, and he blessed the orphanage at South Canaan, Pennsylvania. Toward the end of 1912, he was diagnosed with heart failure that eventually took his life. However, in the 3 years or 2 years intervening before he passed away, he continued to visit various cities over those years, which again really speaks to his level of dedication for his parishioners. So in 1915, he passes away. The OCA website says, they called him, but he did not answer. They shook him, but he was gone. And at that time of his death, in 1915, he was only 55 years old. The Syro Arab mission he helped found boasted 30 parishes and over 25,000 faithful. He served in America for a total of over 20 years and visited parishes all over the United States, Canada, and Mexico. As I mentioned earlier, he was the first Orthodox bishop consecrated in North America. He was canonized as a saint in the year 2000. He's buried at the Antiochian village in Ligonier, and this picture over here is what I took of his grave last year when I was there for the Lord of Spirits Conference. In July of this year, his relics were transferred from the gravesite up the hill to the chapel, and are there any women here who went to the women's conference? You got to venerate the relics, right?
Yes. The skull
The skull? Okay.
was the most prominent. There was other parts of bones too.
Okay, so his relics now can be venerated. So if you ever get the opportunity to go to the Antiochian village, you can do that. Okay, well, let's move on. I'm going to have to speed up things a little bit. We're losing time. So why am I discussing St. John Maximovich, the wonder worker? He's also known as St. John Maximovich of Shanghai and San Francisco. I don't see any New York in his title. Deacon John's not here, so I'm going to blame him and throw him under the bus. There's no New York in his title, true, but he was a repeat participant at the Synod of Bishops, which would meet in New York. So John and I both agreed that it was good enough, and plus he's such an interesting figure. So that's, if you have a beef with it, take a beef. So he was born in 1896 in the village of Adamovka in the province of Kharkov in southern Russia, which is now Ukraine. A member of a little Russian noble family of Maximovich, baptized as Michael, after Michael the Archangel. He was a sickly child who never ate a whole lot. He attends the Poltava military school from 1907 to 1914, where he receives his secondary education. He enters the Kharkov Imperial University and receives a law degree in 1918, just before it's seized by the Soviets. He spends his formative years in Kharkov, which is modern-day Kharkiv in Ukraine, and there acquires the pattern for his future life. The Archbishop Leontovich, which was his mentor while he was there, was very much somebody that he revered. Well, actually, my mistake. In the Protection Monastery lay the remains of the Archbishop Melenti Leontovich. And he was revered at that time for his severe asceticism, particularly his practice of abstaining from sleep, often standing motionless with his hands stretched upward in prayer. Archbishop Leontovich knew the day and the hour of his death, and I think as we go on, you'll see a lot of parallels between him and the life of St. John Maximovich. So St. John spends more time reading the lives of the saints than going to class, though he's an excellent student, and his fascination and veneration of the saints continues throughout his whole life. So during the Russian Civil War, John and his family evacuate to Belgrade, and he enters the University of Belgrade and graduates in 1925. He's then tonsured a monk and a higher deacon in the Milkov Monastery, where he receives the name John. So, he's ordained a hieromarch, hieromunk there in the monastery, and he's attending school. His asceticism and care for others is also very evident early on. At that point, he's already sleeping only about an hour or two each night in a chair, practice that he does for the rest of his life. He never sleeps in a bed, and spends the rest of his time walking through the dormitories, covering sleepers whose blankets had slid off. He would cover them up, make the sign of the cross, and then keep going through the dormitories, checking on everybody. And if he wasn't doing that, you would find him bent over praying before icons. So in 1934, he's raised to the rank of bishop. There's a funny story about this. St. John runs into a lady he knows on the streetcar in Belgrade, and he says that he's in town by mistake, and she inquires why. He said a hieromonk John had been summoned in order to consecrate as a bishop, and they obviously got their Johns mixed up. And so he goes on to his meeting, and then the next day he happens to run into her again on the street, and he says, it was much worse than I thought because they wanted to make me a bishop. And he said this was out of the question because he had speech defect, but he was told that the prophet Moses had the same difficulty, so like, no go, you're a bishop. So Bishop John is sent to China by Metropolitan Anthony in his stead. Metropolitan Anthony was invited to come to Asia for his retirement by another bishop or archbishop, but he denies because of health reasons, and instead he sends this letter along with John. Dear friend, I'm very old and unable to travel, but in place of myself as my soul, as my heart, I am sending you Bishop John. This little frail man looking almost like a child is in actuality a miracle of ascetic firmness and strictness in our time of total spiritual enfeeblement. So here he comes into Shanghai. He immediately gets to work. He finds an unfinished cathedral in jurisdictional conflict, so he oversees the finishing of the cathedral, which is shown right over here, and restores church unity by establishing contact with the Serbs, Greeks, and Ukrainians. He shores up religious education, he celebrates the Divine Liturgy daily, and he supports and participates in helping charitable organizations. One of those is he organizes a home for orphans and the needy children, and personally gathers up the sick and starving children from the streets. He actually goes out himself and looks for children in the slums, and he collects them and brings them to the orphanage. It quickly becomes really evident that St. John is very close to God because in addition to his asceticism and righteous life, he exhibits gifts such as healing and clairvoyance. And Tony let me borrow this book. It's called Man of God, not to be confused with the movie about St. Nectarios. But this is a book of Man of God about St. John Maximovich. And it's not really a biography, but it's a collection of writings of people who knew him, anecdotes about their experiences with him, which is really fascinating. And I'll just share with you a couple of those. So a lady from Hong Kong who has never met him writes a letter asking for his help with a widow and her children. A year passes. When she comes to Hong Kong, she is part of a crowd that goes to meet him in church, and as he passes by her, he turns to her and says, "It's you that wrote me that letter." She had never seen him before, he had never seen her before. Another story comes from someone in Shanghai. He says, Vladika, which is a Slavic term meaning mister, and is often used by a bishop, or to refer to a bishop. Vladika is asked to bring the Holy Mysteries to a dying man in a Russian hospital. He's accompanied by a member of the clergy. Arriving at the hospital, they see a young man, about 20, full of vitality, playing the harmonica. He is waiting in line to be discharged. Vladika calls him and says, "I want to give you Holy Communion." Then and there, the young man has confession and partakes of the Holy Mysteries. The astonished clergyman asks Vladika why he hasn't gone straight to the dying man and instead has delayed with this obviously healthy young man. Vladika replies bluntly, "Tonight, this man will die, whereas the man who is seriously ill will live for many more years." And that's exactly what happened. One other story is about a lady named Anna Petrova Mishnikova, who's a voice teacher in Shanghai, and she taught John proper breathing techniques and pronunciation of words, which helped his diction as he did public speaking, like in his homilies, which he was very appreciative of. Each visit, he paid her $20. During World War II, later on, in 1945, she's in France and is gravely wounded and finds herself in a hospital. She begins asking the nurses to call St. John, who also is in Paris at that time, and to come and give her communion. The nurses refuse. It's wartime. Every night they lock down the hospital. They allow no one in, no one out. But she keeps calling out for St. John, and then around 11 o'clock at night, he appears in the ward. She doesn't believe her eyes and asks whether it's a dream or if he's really there. All he does is smile, he prays, he administers communion, and then he's gone, and she then calms down and goes to sleep. Well, the next morning she feels cured, but no one believes her that St. John visited her the night before since the hospital was so tightly secured. However, a neighboring patient in the ward does say that she saw him too, and then she finds under her pillow a $20 bill. So there's so many of these stories. The Archpriest George Laren, who was an acolyte under St. John in Shanghai, describes St. John's principal motivation as care of souls. And he also observed John's face transformed during the divine liturgy on great feasts, saying that it emanated an unearthly light with eyes full of divine love. I think this is really important because with saints like St. John, we often get really caught up in the amazing, miraculous, sensational stuff. You know, he levitates, he is clairvoyant, he heals people, he appears out of nowhere and, you know, leaves. And we can tend to get fixated on that. But those things didn't make him a saint. Those things were gifts that God gave him because he was a saint, because he exhibited the fruit of the Spirit, because he lived a life totally devoted to Christ, lived a life of love and selflessness toward others. And that is really what we should focus on, even though these stories are truly amazing. And so you can kind of go one of two different ways. You can, if you're a hyper-rationalist, you can say, this is all baloney, these people are hyper-suggestible, it's mass hypnosis. Or you can go the other way and say, like, you have so much attention paid to those, then you lose sight of what really made him who he was. And so I think we need to tread that middle road, as the Orthodox way always is, and make sure that we're not going off one side or the other. So, we need to hurry up here. He's raised to the rank of Archbishop. Let's see. He's raised to the rank of Archbishop, and he eventually, when the communists take over China, he helps Russian refugees seek refuge in the Philippine Islands, and they live in an international refugee camp. He also plays a role in helping the refugees resettle in the United States. He actually travels to Washington, D.C., and appeals to congressmen to allow their entry into America. And he was so persuasive that they actually changed some legislation to allow that to happen. So Europe, I'm just going to say something very quickly about that. His most significant accomplishment in Europe for the wider Orthodox world stems from his deep veneration of the saints. And so he extends this deep knowledge and veneration of the saints to pre-schism Western saints when he's stationed in Paris and in Belgium. He collects fertilized and images and submits a long list of them to the Synod. So the reason we have a lot of these Western saints on our calendar is because of the work of St. John Maximovich, so we owe him a great debt. Okay, he's finally in America. 1962, he's sent to San Francisco at the request of thousands of Russians who had known him in Shanghai, probably a lot of these who he helped bring to the United States. His lifelong friend, Archbishop Tikhon, retires, and there's another new cathedral that is not finished, and more bitter disputes, just like Shanghai. So it's like, well, he's the one to settle this because he did it in Shanghai. So he successfully oversees the completion of the cathedral, restores the peace, although he faces numerous attacks and slanders, and at one point he even has to go to court to defend himself, which he doesn't like doing at all. Despite being exonerated of any wrongdoing, the attacks continue until his death, but he never retaliates or judges those who oppose him. Archpriest Valery Lukyanov comments, Vladika never concealed malice in his heart toward anyone. Even towards those ill-disposed to him, he acted as if nothing was between them. This trait particularly impressed me. If only we could all conduct ourselves like that in our difficult times. And I think this kind of gets back to my point just a minute ago. That's what's important. And that's the hardest. You know, that really is the hardest. That was one of the parts that convicted me because I don't know that like that. A couple of great stories here about when he crashes a Halloween party and then his continuing ongoing war against makeup, which I find very amusing. So Russians didn't really celebrate Halloween in Russia to any great extent. So when they come to San Francisco, they suddenly learn about Halloween. This is a fun dress-up party. So a group of Russians throw a Halloween ball. At the same time that the San Francisco Cathedral, St. John's Church, is holding an all-night vigil. A number of the people were absent, which he noticed, and he knew why. And this caused him great sorrow. So after the service, John went to the place where the ball was still in progress. He climbs the steps, he enters the hall. Everybody's astonished, like, oh my gosh, Bishop John is here. The music stops, and in complete silence, he glares at everyone. And he slowly, deliberately, with his staff, just walks around the whole hall and just like looks at everybody. Doesn't say a word, just walks around, and then he leaves. Oh, that killed the party right there. So the next day in church, he's thundering about his holy indignation and his flaming zeal, calling all to the devout Christian life. So they probably ended the Halloween parties on all-night vigils. Another thing that he opposed, as I said, was makeup and lipstick. So I'm just the messenger here. I'm not advocating anything. I'm not saying anything canonical. This is not Father Stephen told me to say this, but this is just what Bishop John said. When he started his ministry at the old cathedral, he was shocked to see a number of women who came to church wearing makeup, and even to Holy Communion wearing makeup. And St. John decided he would solve the problem right away. So each Sunday, he stationed an acolyte at the front door with a pail of water, soap, and scrub brush, and going to the cathedral and asking all the women to scrub their faces before entering the church. So if you see a tub of water in the front of the church,
You won't be doing that. I've got 3 daughters.
So I love those two stories. They demonstrate a sternness that he had and a conviction. But he really was better known for his playfulness and his joy. And especially with children. He always took time out to speak to the children, and he'd be playful with them even while he was blessing them with holy water. And Father Stephen told me a story about his grandfather that sort of involves this, and I asked if he would mind telling the story. So would you mind telling that story real quick?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. So this apparently is a story that happened to lots of people over time, but the gift that some people have is they make you feel like you're the only one. So my grandfather would tell it as if he was the only person that this ever happened to, and it's documented that it's not. But anyway, he was serving with them in New York at the cathedral, and there's a time of the service when the bishop's hands are supposed to be blessed, right before the gifts are brought out for the great entrance. And my grandfather was holding the basin, and the other guys were on either side with the cloth. And he washes Archbishop John's hands, and he went like this in his face. In a very serious part of the service, he didn't know what to do. And he always remembered that. And then later, when St. John was recognized as a saint, he relished telling that story about how he got sprinkled in the face by a saint. So, even in the midst of the liturgy, he had, as you said, a playful, approachable aspect to him too. So that's the story. And so my grandpa used to sprinkle us in the face too.
Is he hoping to become a saint? You know?
I think he just wanted to get us wet.
Well, thank you, Father.
Yeah.
So, John's sudden death in 1966 catches everyone by surprise except for him. he's talking to a manager at an orphanage near where he lives, and they're speaking about a diocesan meeting that's scheduled 3 years in the future. And Bishop John tells him, well, I won't be here for that. And he doesn't mean I'm not going to go to the meeting. He means I'm not going to be on earth when that happens. He also tells the lady that he will die soon, around the end of June, but not in San Francisco. He said he's going to die in Seattle. The night before his departure for Seattle, 4 days before his death, at the close of the liturgy, when people are coming up venerating the cross and kissing the hand of the priest, he tells one man, "You will not kiss my hand again." And on July 2nd, 1966, after celebrating the Divine Liturgy in Seattle, he stays at the altar after the liturgy for 3 hours praying. Later he goes to his room in the parish building next to the church, and he dies. They hear a noise upstairs of something hitting the floor, and they run out, and he's lying on the floor, and they help him up into a chair, and he's like, "I don't know what happened, that's never happened to me before." And then he passes away. So he was very much like that person, the archbishop that he venerated in Russia, who knew of his own death and when that was going to happen. He was canonized by the Russian Church on July 2nd, 1994. So this is the Holy Virgin Cathedral, a new cathedral in San Francisco. I pulled this photograph off the internet here, but these interior images on here on the following slides were supplied by Tony, who visited this church not too long ago. So here we have the inside of the cathedral, the iconostasis, beautiful, beautiful interior space. This is actually shrine to Bishop John, to St. John, and his relics are right here, so you can venerate them. Here's the dome of the church. Here is another view of the church, and then here's a close-up view of where the relics are located. Here's another shot of that, and this is St. John's actual hands. His whole body is there, and you can venerate it. Really quickly, we're going to have 1 or 2 minutes. What can we take away from St. Raphael and St. John? Well, a couple things. The lives of the saints, they look very different from one another, but what ties them together is their complete devotion to Christ. And while not perfect, they exhibit lives of holiness, repentance, and humility. Sometimes the people who knew them didn't like them. They got on people's nerves. They were considered odd. St. John would walk around barefoot. They'd act strange, according to normal people. They sometimes made mistakes. They rubbed people the wrong way. So that got me thinking, like, who rubs you the wrong way in church or not in church? And maybe they're a saint, maybe you don't know. But even if they're not, maybe they can help you become one by how you react to them. So another question I'll just kind of leave you with, I don't have a real good answer for it. Maybe I'm sure Father Stephen has some good pointers. But how do we develop a relationship with the saints, with them individually, rather than just looking to them to do things for us? We often hear in just the larger culture, well, that's the saint of football, so I'm going to pray to that saint for my team, whatever. That's not really what that's all about. And we also do that with Christ, like, please give me this job, please give me this wife, please give me this whatever, and we make God and the saints into Santa Clauses. But that's really not the goal. The goal is to develop a relationship with Christ, to develop a relationship with his saints, just as we develop relationships with each other on the church on earth. We can do that to the church in heaven. Just lastly, through the prayers of St. Raphael and St. John the Wonder Worker, may we also be made worthy of the heavenly kingdom. Amen. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions?
We can maybe take a 5-minute break, 'cause it's 8 o'clock right now, and
Okay.
then we can just reconvene.
Okay,
Yeah?
I'll just wrap up.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So thank you all for coming. We have 3 more sessions. Next week is going to be Saints of Alaska. We're going to do the Saints of Pennsylvania, and then Serbian Saints of North America. By virtue of how they are, they're all freestanding. It's a very busy time of year, I know, for everybody, so if you can't come to all of them, which we'd love to have you here, that's fine. Come to what you can, and please feel free to stick around, like Father said, and have some fellowship and some snacks, and Father will close us in prayer.
Thanks so much, Lydia. Ray, you did a good job. I know that some of you may have some questions. We're just gonna take like a 3 to 4 minute break. If anyone needs to go to the restroom, if those of you that need to leave, you go ahead and leave, and we'll just reconvene here in probably about 3 or 4 minutes, okay? So that those that need to go can do it without feeling they're being judged. 'Cause that's the way it goes. All right, let's pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. It is truly meet to bless the Theotokos, ever blessed, most pure, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without defilement, thou gavest birth to God's word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Also, sometime tomorrow or the day after, this recording of this will be on our website under the lectures tab. Okay, God bless you.
I forgot to say, tomorrow is